Good morning, 80s TV ladies. I'm Susan Lambert-Haddam.
And I'm Sharon Johnson. 80s TV Ladies is our podcast where we get to talk about female-driven television shows from the 1980s. Today, we're diving into the last couple of seasons of Remington Steele. We have a special guest today who worked on some of the final episodes of the show. And if you don't know by now, Remington Steele starred Stephanie Zimbalist, Pierce Brosnan, and Doris Roberts. It ran from 1982 to 1987 on NBC.
And I know today we're going to be talking about both seasons 4 and 5, but all my questions are about season 5.
I don't know that I have any questions about season 4, but still looking forward as always to talk about it. But we have a special guest today who worked on season 5. Is that why it's the one where you have all the questions?
Well, that and because season 5 is infuriating, confusing, and just plain weird.
It may have suffered some season 5. The show was canceled and then it wasn't blues.
It may have.
Before we get started with season 4, just to recap, at the end of season 3, Remington Steele takes off because of immigration issues, state license issues, and Laura Holt has said things were easier without him. So he disappears to the UK. And then in season 4, we pick up with Laura and Mildred showing up in the UK to find him, and they do in the first 2 episodes. Then they all reconcile, and Laura spills the beans to Mildred on the Remington Steele secret truth. So Mildred now knows that the man she knew as Remington Steele is not Remington Steele. By the end of season 4, Laura and Steele have a fake marriage to keep him in the country.
A lot of the fans were both excited and unexcited by that, but it was the end of the series. At that point, then the show is canceled and they think it's over. Season 4, just to concentrate a little bit on stuff that I really found a challenge in season 4, is some of the episodes felt like, oh, here's the wrestling episode, right? But also Laura Holt really is, and Stephanie Zimbalist is doing a beautiful job, but Laura Holt keeps sort of having to insert herself and assert herself into her own show is what it felt like to me, that it was a lot of the Pierce Brosnan show. Again, hard to fault the appeal of him, but it becomes the struggle of the show. The struggle of the show becomes not them working together, but him dealing with his immigration issues and him struggling to kind of win her over and him doing this and then Laura being mad at him for it. And then Laura basically going, no, but it's my agency, and it's my this. And so it felt more like she was sort of always on the defensive in season 4 a lot. Even though it started, I thought, pretty well when she shows up and it's like, okay, I'm coming to get you because you're an idiot for running away.
I wonder to what degree some of that had to do with the fact that television and certainly Remington Steele was more episodic at that time. And they have a tendency to write and rewrite certain beats of the relationship because I think from research, they know that most people don't watch every episode. So for those of us that do watch every episode, it does become repetitive. You're thinking, didn't they resolve that already? But okay, we'll move on.
This happened in the 80s a lot because if you missed an episode, you missed it till the summer or a rerun. And so they didn't do a lot of tracking relationships so carefully as you would kind of have to do now. Now it is about watching, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and you just consume them all almost like a miniseries.
And I'm also not trying to give the writers too hard a time because writing that many episodes of television every season is really hard under the best of circumstances. And it's easy. It was probably easy, if you will, for them to fall in the pattern of, okay, we're going to write about this conflict, whatever it is, instead of trying to be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, creative in the way that they dealt with the situation, the circumstances between them. Maybe they felt like they'd I don't know. There could be a lot of reasons for it.
I think it was one of the shows that was kind of inventing how to do that. Somewhat for the first time on television.
True.
A lot of people, I think, that would then do a Will They, Won't They, a Jim and Pam or a thing, really had those forerunners. They stood on the shoulders of giants, like Remington Steele.
Exactly.
Season 4, I actually liked the first couple episodes of London because I liked it when they went on location. But also, there's an episode, Forged Steel, episode 5, where Remington suffers a memory loss, and it turns out apparently he lost the agency in a poker game. And I just thought that was actually very clever. It becomes a case, and I thought it was a pretty clever case. I loved when Louie Anderson came on and guest starred. I thought he was really just adorable, and that was for Steele Spawning, episode 12. They had to chase down some missing, Russian caviar, as you do, for the American caviar czar, which was Louie Anderson's father. Like, he had made some deal and he didn't want his daddy to find out because he was like the son that was always messing up. And then another episode that stood out for me was Suburban Steel, episode 13, kind of in the dead middle of the season. And a dead man shows up in Laura's sister's kitchen. Laura and Remington have to take care of Laura's nieces and nephews. And I think there are direct nods in that episode to Scarecrow and Mrs. King, because Laura's sister's car is basically the same station wagon as Mrs. King drove.
One of the ones that stand out for me that season is Coffee, Tea, or Steel, which is set on a luxury airline. And to be honest, I think it stood out for me more because of the depiction of air travel as being this potentially this luxurious experience where you have stewardesses, as they call them at the time, walking around with trays of drinks and all the space up in the
so
first class or wherever these people were sitting, and chairs. And I had frankly never experienced that, and it certainly isn't the case these days that you would see something like that on a plane. So
yes, it felt like a cruise ship.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I like that episode, because also in that episode is, again, Laura goes undercover as an airline stewardess and is treated poorly because of it as a woman. Also, Terry O'Quinn guest stars on that from
That's
Lost.
Right.
So at the end of season 4, the series is canceled. Looks like Pierce Brosnan is going to be cast as James Bond, and Stephanie Zimbalist actually is cast opposite Peter Weller in RoboCop. But summer repeats happen, Remington Steele ratings go up, and they reboot the show, and they call everybody, we need everybody back. And they had shut everything down. So they call everybody back. Stephanie doesn't get to do RoboCop. Pierce Brosnan has to wait to do James Bond. He does that crazy People magazine cover where he's like, I hate them.
Pretty much.
And we come back for basically 3 TV movies. Sort of 6 episodes or 3 TV movies. We're still not sure. They have a bad honeymoon in Mexico meets Romancing the Stone kind of episodes. They introduce a romantic rival for Remington Steele to try and make a love triangle happen. Jack Scalia. We'll talk about him in a minute. And it's still all about the immigration. So Remington goes back to LA and then has to go back to London, and then finds out he inherited a castle with a lot of debt, and then suddenly we're in Scotland, and then suddenly we're wrapping up the show. But at least they bring Daniel Chalmers back, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., which I thought was quite lovely. And then they kind of wrap up Remington Laura pretty well. It's kind of nice.
And also, it's very clear that season 5 is about him. It's really not about Laura. It's all about him. And the series is really tipped from being initially about her to being about them, and now it's all about him, and everything that's going on revolves around him, and she's just sort of there.
Well, and then they introduce a guy character, and Mildred has nothing to do.
But even what they do with the guy character is first he starts out as one thing, and then suddenly he's something else, and then he's something else again, and it's very confusing, and don't really care because they're not at all consistent with what or who he's supposed to be, which I just found a waste of time at the end of the day, as much as I like Jack Scalia from that time. So
Yes. But who could answer maybe some of these questions? Not all of them. And he's not responsible for any of the writing of this season or any of the conceptual stuff. But I want to introduce our guest, Jerram Swartz, who worked on some of the final episodes of Remington Steele. We've known each other for years, he and I, since he worked with my husband, Richard Haddam, on an incredible miniseries called The Lost Room in 2006, starring Peter Krause, Juliana Margulies, Dennis Christopher, Peter Jacobson, and Elle Fanning. It is a beautiful, underrated, not many people know about it miniseries that everyone should see, The Lost Room.
Jerram is an assistant director and production manager with over 100 credits that include E.T., The Extraterrestrial, The Blues Brothers, and The Walking Dead. He has filmed on locations throughout the U.S. and Europe. Jerram left the glamour of 16-hour workdays for the comparative sanity of the life of an analyst at the California Film Commission. He is also an occasional lecturer and producer, director, lyricist for 7 seasons of the Pasadena Follies.
So welcome to the show, Jerram. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on. Jerram, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, of course, we have your bio, but how did you get into movies and television in the first place?
I took a class in college about movies. I went to a college in England called Sussex University.
Ooh. And
the assignment was to write a screenplay. And so I did that. And they said, okay, now go produce it. It's like, humana. And so we built our own lights and we took our 16 millimeter film camera and pushed it 3 stops. So we just invented it with some guys from school, and we had little green screen, little things, and it was terrible, but that was fun. And when I graduated, I came to America and got into the Universal Studios mailroom. And there I started delivering mail to people whose names are now on the buildings, the Alfred Hitchcocks and the Verna Fields and the people like that, the Lou Wassermans.
Wow.
And from that, I found out about a thing called the Assistant Director's Training Program. And I went down to USC one morning and took the test, and I did not get in. And then the next year, I went down to USC and got in, and the rest is history. I've done that for years and years and years and years.
That's amazing. That's through the Directors Guild.
Through the Directors Guild, yes.
And they still have that program, yes?
They do.
Okay, all right. Let's just, cut to the chase of how you ended up on season 5 of Remington Steele.
The life as an assistant director. When I started, if you worked at Universal Studios, they would put you on show after show after show, and you'd just stay at the studio. But Sharon and I presided over the very end of the studio system. I think she was actually the last contract player in Hollywood.
She was. So I just read that.
For both of us, it was the end of the studio system, which meant that once I was through the training program, I had to find my own work. And that meant going from place to place, studio to studio, independent to independent, depending on who liked you, who didn't like you. And eventually, over 40 years, it became who died and didn't die. But so from time to time, I would find myself working at CBS Radford on shows. And what was different then is that the people who hired the assistant director in television were basically the producers and I can't think of the guy. Oh, Abby Singer was there at that time.
Oh, okay.
Is that a name that means anything to you guys?
It is familiar to me.
He was, Abby Singer is the man after whom the shot The Abby Singer was named. May I
Yes,
tell
please
you about
explain the Abby Singer shot.
This is something as an assistant director you learned very quickly. You had to announce when you're on the next to last shot of the day. We're on the Abby Singer.
Ah.
And the reason for that was when I knew Abby, he was in his 80s, 70s or 80s. Way back in the day, probably the 50s or 60s, he was an assistant director. And he was famous for saying, okay, this is the last shot. Okay, this is the last shot. He never actually got the last shot correct. So the next to the last shot is historically the Abby Singer. So when you know that you have 2 shots left, you make the announcement to the crew.
It is crazy because I guess I assumed that Abby Singer was an actual person, but I never actually knew that anybody knew Abby Singer.
He was a total sweetie pie.
Oh, that's great.
There's actually one other old soul that I'd like to do a commercial for because his name is largely forgotten at this point, and that is Wally Worsley Jr. And when I was a trainee, when I was a young pup at Universal, he was an old dog there. He was and I worked with him. I knew him when I was in the mailroom, and then later I worked with him on E.T. He was the production manager on E.T. the Extraterrestrial. He had been the prop man on Wizard of Oz.
Come on.
He and his dad, Wally Worsley Sr., had been the director of the original Lon Chaney Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Wow.
So
that is pretty amazing. So you started when like old Hollywood was still around, but the end of it, the end of the studio system.
Yeah.
Like you said, and Sharon Glass talks about that in her book.
I did have a camera assistant say to me on a movie, he said, "Are you the same Jerram Swartz that was working in the 70s?" And it's like, okay, I'm going to have to kill you.
I think most people like me are familiar with the studio system as it applied to actors and actresses, but not as much to the production crew, that was something similar in that regard. So that's really interesting that was also part of the system.
And really, when I started, everybody looked like they were in their 50s and 60s, and they were all white guys, and they all smoked, and coffee at craft service cost a nickel or a dime or something.
You had to pay for coffee at craft service?
You had to pay for coffee at craft service. And it was very crude. So you asked me how I got onto
Remington
Steele. And it was really just one of those calls. I worked, I guess, was Derek Kavanaugh on it? No, I don't think so. It's just one of the guys at CBS called me, and sure, I went in and I met the director, who's a guy named Christopher Hibbler, who came from a line that was well regarded at Disney in particular. His dad he had a cool first name. Do you remember?
Oh, no. I don't remember anything at Disney.
Okay. So I'd worked with Chris, so it's possible he put my name in at some point. On a Disney movie, I'd been a second assistant director on something called Hot Lead and Cold Feet.
Yeah, I saw that title.
With Jim Dale.
Okay, yeah.
And it was kind of an old-timey Disney kids movie. It was a Western. And the guy who's the head of the studio was Ron somebody, who had been Walt Disney's son-in-law. And they still remembered Walt. And Chris Hibbler, he told me stories about how he had to work with Walt, teaching him how to sign his name the way it looks on the TV show.
Wow. Oh, my God.
Christopher had directed a promo at Disneyland, and they had all kinds of ways and complicated routines that you had to go through. And there was a giant shot of things happening and people doing things and dancers, and they were screening it for Walt. And Walt said, "What's that little triangle of grass there? That isn't green. What's wrong with that?" So he was relating how extraordinary attention to detail Walt Disney had. And it's like there was still at a time, and I can't remember what year it was, probably 77, 78, that, this was still a name that was spoken with reverence.
For sure.
You did not make a joke about Walt being in a, cooling chamber somewhere. Somebody said it while I was there. This would have been 77, 78. Walt who?
No
that somebody
way.
Actually said, that's not the way Walt would have said it, done it. And somebody said, Walt who? And it's like everybody went nuts.
Yeah. No. I think you'd get in trouble for doing that now.
So when you joined the crew of Remington Steele, I would imagine that the crew was maybe half folks that had worked on the show before. To what degree were there people who had worked on the show before it was canceled? And
they were all new to me. Okay. And it wasn't clear about anything. I can't. Here's the thing that I remember about it. Mm-hmm. First, I get to go to Ireland. Well, I have my wife and I have my new baby. Kate is 6 months old.
Oh my God, Kate was 6.
So what I'd like to do, I asked them.
Hold on. I just have to picture that for a minute because I know Kate. Okay, go.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to take the first class ticket that you give me as an assistant director, as a member of the guild, and change it into 2, steerage tickets. There we were with this little 6-month-old baby, and she'd already been on location. When she was 6 weeks old, we went to Texas to do a movie, Adam, the sequel to the movie Adam.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, she has an appearance in TV Guide being held by Jo Beth Williams in the ad art.
Oh, that's so funny.
Because they'd had a little baby there, so she was there, and so this was her second location. And so what I remember was the excitement of going someplace fantastic, and we hadn't been to Dublin before. I had been as a student, but Debbie and obviously Kate had not. But we started off filming in town. And the only part of the filming that I remember is that we did a car chase, and it was in the little alleys in Pasadena. We were not centered in Pasadena, but this was, before Pasadena really happened. We were living in Altadena at the time, so we were very familiar with the Pasadena and the little alleys between Union and Colorado.
Okay. All right. I know what you're talking about.
And we had like a London cab and a car that we were going to double over there.
That's so
and we
funny.
did some chase stuff here, which we later did there.
All right. I'm going back and looking at that last episode. I know what chase you're talking about.
Okay, good. I don't. The other thing I remember is once we got to shooting is that it was clear that there was a cloud. Remember Pigpen?
Yes.
There was a cloud over the name of the star.
Pierce
Brosnan's head. And that was all around James Bond.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that he was just perpetually in a bad mood because he would never, ever get to play James Bond now.
It
that was
looked like
clearly
that at the time.
that was never, ever going to happen.
I mean, that's what it looked like,
Right.
for sure. It looked like that ship had sailed in some ways.
Right. So I think that, and I took that as a great life lesson. You know, the great life lesson is if you're Pierce Brosnan and they say you can't be James Bond, that it doesn't mean you're not ever going to do James Bond. It just means you're not going to do James Bond this time. And I've referred to that in my life, actually.
So were you aware of all of the drama around Pierce Brosnan not getting to play James Bond at the end of season 4 before you started working on the show? Or was that something you learned when you got there?
No, I mean, I might have known about it. I didn't care. You know, he was professional. He was fine. Stephanie, I liked. We met her dad at one point. He came. Was he in my episode?
He's in your episodes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember at that point doing some research and finding about his father.
Yes, the violinist.
And putting some bricks there. I mean, that was very impressive. I mean, that was probably the most impressive celebrity aspect of it for me was, you know, the violinist to the Tsar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And not bad for a nice Jewish boy, right?
Right.
Right.
So I will say this. The performances are not lackluster.
Correct.
They are working really hard. So I'm going to give some, like, it was clear to everybody that he was really bummed that he lost. I mean, and who wouldn't be? It looks like you just lost playing James Bond, a role that, quite honestly, you were kind of built to play and thought you were going to get to play. And then you lose it because they want to just take a slight advantage of your contract.
Well, and I'm sure that helped them, right? That the notoriety around, he could play, his value went up to the show people.
And we surmise that that's exactly why it was brought back, because it was canceled. And then literally at the last minute, when it became apparent he was going to be cast as James Bond, they said, oh, no, well, we need to do this. We need to do more of this.
Because everybody got excited about watching Remington Steele. Like, they're like, the new James Bond. So we have questions? So many questions. Were you part of the castle? Was there a castle where you were?
We were filming Dublin for London. We brought a red double-decker bus up from England to Dublin. They don't belong in Ireland.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, so I just assumed you were filming Dublin for Scotland. So you were on...
How stupid is that?
Oh, silly.
They had a great studio there, by the way. A very old studio, way out in the boonies. You can look it up and find out the name. I can't think of it now. It's still there. But I remember we were filming Police Squad Room there. And there was, in every squad room you go to, there's like pigeonholes filled with papers and stuff. And I happened to look at it, and it was time cards from guys working at the studios in the 50s and 60s. Wow. I mean, it was just, it's just random paper that happened to be around that the art department had access to and jammed them in and jammed them in and jammed them in. Oh.
Ardmore Studios?
Ardmore, yes. And memorably, I had a production meeting to lead at Ardmore, and they gave me a rental car, and I was like 45 minutes late because I got totally lost in the backwoods of driving around. It was before satellites, of course.
It was all real time, real life stuff. There's no cell phones. There's no, there's no video. You're filming on film. Even
for a long time, I'm not sure when, reflex cameras came in. I remember when I started as a trainee that not even the camera operator could see exactly what image was going on to the film. He had to rack over. Right. It's like you had to look through here and then kind of assume what was going to be there.
Wow.
Now, any idiot on the set can see exactly, on his iPhone. Yes. Sometimes they broadcast, right?
Yeah.
Can see exactly what the shot is. But then even the operator couldn't see.
Wow.
All right. So you were on like 4 and 5 then? Or you were?
No, I think it would have been 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, right?
So you were on 3 and 4?
Yeah.
So you were on 3 and 4. So
I accept that.
Okay. I'm going to...
No castle.
I mean, no castle.
Right.
But I think when we were watching it, your name came up on 4 or 5.
It would have been 4. It would have been...
it came up on 5 or 6. It came up on one of the ones...
Okay, maybe somebody owes me money then.
Yeah. All right. So no castle, but I am glad you got to meet Jerram Swartz Jr. He's wonderful in the show.
And I have favorable feelings for Jack Scalia, too. That was a nice guy.
Well, that's good that he was a nice guy. It was the wrong show and the wrong part. I think, for him.
Well, it would have been if they had been consistent with who this character is supposed to be.
They changed what he was every episode.
And there were only 6 episodes or 3 hours, but he's this, and it was so confusing.
He does a fine job.
Right.
It's not him. He's got a great career. He's was totally the hunk of the 80s, one of the hunks of the 80s, and is still working and worked a lot. Did a lot of cool stuff.
It was the writing
was an
that
actual, Major League Baseball player. And I also think that in some ways they were like, okay, well, we're not going to have Pierce, but maybe we'll get Stephanie and a new guy. Like for a minute, it feels like that's what they're trying to do.
Oh, I hadn't thought about it from that standpoint.
In that season 5 is like, oh, okay, so he had to come back for season 5. He's not going to stay. Maybe we can carry this show through. That's what it feels like. And that may have been Michael Gleason. That may have been somebody at the studio.
Which would have made sense if, on some level, if the show weren't called Remington Steele, because how do you continue the show without Remington Steele? You can't put another guy and say this is now Remington Steele.
It's the spinoff, right?
Your job as the first assistant director is just to keep things rolling.
My job as the first assistant director is to prep the show within an eyelash of its being and to take the script, break it down, figure out how long everything's going to take to film, put the strips in order. We still had cardboard strips then.
All wood strips. Okay, so
cardboard strips, wooden.
Can you explain this to our listeners?
This is a technology that was invented, according to lore, by Charlie Chaplin and his secretary. And that was, they would take strips of emulsion and write on it with a grease pencil what the scene was.
And emulsion is film strips.
Film strips, exposed film strips. So it's like not reactive. And pin it on a bulletin board. And evidently, this woman came up with the idea of giving each actor a number, Charlie Chaplin being number 1. And that's where number 1 on the call sheet comes from that moment.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And having a list of the different characters, not the actors, but the characters, and numbers that go down. And every time character number 1 is in the scene, you put a 1 there. And every time number 2 is in the scene, you put a 2 a little bit lower. And so you can see by this array on your corkboard where 1 works. And for example, you don't want Charlie waiting around. So you don't have a scene with 1 at the beginning of the day and 1 at the end of the day. So it's a graphic way of looking at the information. And that became, by the time you get into the 30s, you have the technology that I was brought up on, which is cardboard strips of different colors. Daytime, nighttime, interior, exterior. There's a whole... actually, each studio had its own coding
system
of that. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's how I learned in film school, mid-80s.
So, well, that's how it was. That's how we did it for years. And for years, even after we had computers, I still kept a board that I felt that I was able to, and to this day, I will tell you that my boards were 5 to 7% better because there was a tactile aspect to moving the strips around to get the correct schedule that you don't get when you're dragging and dropping on a computer.
Well, that just to have the visualization of it in front of you, for me, I could see that being better for me.
But you can't do on a computer is you can't get the whole movie in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean, to see the whole picture of what's happening.
And to have to walk to the end of the movie and pick strips and bring them to the front of the movie.
Yes. Yes.
So it is different. And I remember some big movies we worked on had multiple boards, had boards that, stretched to run. And I worked with a director who said that and what would happen is every time you have a list of strips that are going to be your day's work followed by a black strip. It says, okay, everything before that is this day, Thursday, day 7, right? And there was a director that I worked with, he said that the act of putting the strips that you've shot behind the header board as the header board moves down is better than We still do the board exactly the same way. Movie magic is really kind of the go-to technology. Other people have tried to come up with things. It really is the standard. It's a very effective way of manipulating information and being able to print out vast amounts of incorrect information very quickly.
We heard that.
By the time I got to Riptide, we had gotten it down to the point where I would finish prep. This is the night before the production meeting at 7:00. I would finish at Cannell's office, which is still at the office isn't there. The building is there. La Brea and Hollywood Boulevard.
Yes.
Drive down to Barbara's place on Santa Monica and drop it off to them, and they would work all night and generate the
shooting
schedule for the production meeting.
I'm sorry that Rich isn't here to talk about Riptide. I think he wants to do a whole podcast on Riptide. That I'll leave to you and him. You also worked on a lot of cool 70s shows. Emergency, one of the first shows you worked on.
It was literally the first show I worked on. I worked so many hours on that I sometimes slept in the fireman bed on the set.
Oh, that's so sweet. I was Randolph, Mantooth, and Kevin Teague. Ty.
Yeah.
All right, so say that again.
Kevin Ty.
Kevin Ty. Randolph, Mantooth, and Kevin Ty. They were so adorable. They were saving lives all over town.
Julie London.
Who's
the band leader that
I don't know.
With white hair. No, he was also in the show.
Oh, I don't know.
And Robert Fuller.
Okay.
Randy Mantooth, it was so funny. He was like this idol, right? He was like this
teen. He was the sexy one.
Yeah. Nice guys. They were really nice. And Kevin was more of an intellectual. So I had a nice rapport with him. And he did a lot of movies for, like, he was in Six Man Out.
Oh, he's done a ton of stuff.
No, really. What's the name of that writer-director that did a bunch of cool stuff with Kevin Ty? 9 Men Out. Who did that?
Oh, Sayles.
John Sayles. So he did a lot of John Sayles movies.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's just done a lot of movies, but I didn't know that he was like, I guess he is one of his go-to guys. Sure.
So the thing I remember about Randy Mantooth, we were always shooting in really hot places. It was like, you'd get the script. I remembered it's like, oh yeah, we got a car on the roof, this one, and what other horrible things are happening. But I remember we were shooting way out by Magic Mountain. In those days, it took a long time to get to Magic Mountain, right? And it was a million degrees. And he invited me into his trailer, and he offered me an ice cold Werner's Diet ginger ale. And I'd never had it before, and that was like his thing that he loved. And he was very generous in sharing that with me.
Was Bobby Troop the
Bobby Troop? Thank you. Yes. He was a big deal band leader. He was a big deal.
Big deal.
Yeah. And Julie London was a great singer.
Well, Emergency was like the first time I was like, oh, that's what Los Angeles looks like. Because it was set in LA. But you also worked on Barnaby Jones and Columbo, worked with Peter Falk, Buddy Ebsen.
Buddy Ebsen was adorable. He would occasionally fall asleep during takes. And about 30 years later, I went to my bank in Altadena. It was the Bank of America up on Lake Avenue. And there was a security guard there, a much older guy with big mutton chop, white mustache. And he said to me, "Did you work on Barnaby Jones?" I said, "Yeah, I worked on Barnaby Jones." He said, "I remember Barnaby Jones trying to teach you to tap dance." And swear to God, it was true. He was a stand-in on the show.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
So that came back to haunt me many, many years later.
Adam wouldn't say haunt. I think you should put it on a plaque somewhere that Barnaby Jones taught you to tap dance.
No, he didn't.
He wasn't successful.
No.
He tried to, as a security guard said. But how did that come about that he wanted to?
Of course, I was a young schmuck. Can you teach me to tap dance or something? I don't remember what it was, but it was like, of course, I want to learn to tap dance from the original Tin Man. Yes. From the Tin Man.
The Tin Man. We're going to take a little break. We're going to come back. We're going to ask some more questions of Jerram and his life in the 80s on television and movies.
Life in the 80s.
All right, Sharon, welcome back. Welcome back, Jerram. We're getting goofy over here. We're getting a little bit silly.
Well, because we're having such a great conversation. It's been so fascinating.
All right. So again, not an 80s TV lady at all. But we have to talk about the Blues Brothers. That was your first movie as a first assistant?
Well, so what happened was I had started at Universal in the mailroom. And then when it came time, once I got into the training program, I was kind of seamlessly integrated into Emergency there. That was a show there. So I'm still working at the studio.
Which clearly I'm the only one that loved, but okay. Melissa loved it too. Awesome.
I didn't see it, unfortunately.
Yes, Julie London.
I worked on a couple of features there. The first one was Swashbuckler.
Ooh.
Anybody ever hear of that?
No.
That was a pirate movie before pirate movies were successful. After they were successful and before they were successful.
Yes. With
Robert Shaw and James Earl Jones and Jean-Pierre Bujold.
I'm trying to figure out how I never knew about Swashbuckler, considering the cast, because, wow, I'm going to have to find it and watch it. So
James Earl Jones was the nicest guy in the world. And Jean-Pierre Bujold was so hot. She was great.
All right. Well, okay. Now we got to go all watch Swashbuckler.
Exactly.
And Robert Shaw was a drunk jerk. And at one point, we were standing next to each other, and he was super intellectual, really smart. He wrote a bunch of plays. He wrote The Man in the Glass Booth.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
You know, he was very much into the bottle at that point. This was before The Sting, but after Jaws.
All right. So
yes, it was after Jaws.
No, but the Sting was 73, 74.
Oh, then I guess maybe it was after The Sting. We were down in Mexico, and he's standing there in his little red pirate outfit, and we're watching James Earl Jones do a thing, and suddenly he hits me in the ribs. He just goes like whap, and he takes my breath away. And I look at him, and he says to me, "And there's nothing you can do about it."
Are you serious?
I am serious.
Wow.
Okay.
So I got custody of the story.
You got custody.
So
of
here
that
we
story.
are, and I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed to say that. I came back to Universal. And they hired me, actually, Wally Worsley and some of the other guys, they hired me for a couple of months to wander around, poke my nose around, and write the manual of Universal Studios. And this is this department, and this is who's here, and thing like that. And they took out all my jokes and all my quotes and all my cartoons and things, and they made it corporate policy for 7 years. So that was a nice gig. And then they promoted me to first assistant director, and I was working on a show called Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Oh, wow.
Also one of my favorites from childhood.
Bitty, bitty, bitty. This was 1979. Universal at that point was still like a college campus, and everybody kind of knew each other, and you'd visit each other's sets, and you'd see people at the commissary, and you kind of, you know, it was like a collegial sort of organization, and people started disappearing. It was like one by one, people were disappearing. And it's like, oh, what happened to Fran? Oh, well, she's in Chicago. Oh, what happened to... Oh, they sent him to Chicago. And what was happening is they were prepping this movie called The Blues Brothers there, which was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And they were expanding the number of people they needed to work on it. And sure enough, I got this call, Jerram, you're going to Chicago.
You're going to Chicago.
So I was a freshly minted first AD. I had been a first on 1 or 2 episodes of Buck Rogers, and they were quick to tell me, we don't want you to go and run the set. There's a guy, David Sosna, who's been prepping with John Landis for months. He's going to run the set. David, by the way, is, to my mind, like the best in the business. The work he did on Blues Brothers is second to none. But we need help coordinating stuntmen coming in and out, bluesmobiles, this security at the mall, things like, you know, they couldn't even enumerate what they needed. We just want to send you there. So, okay, well, whatever it is, it's better than Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. And so I kissed my girlfriend goodbye. I said, I'll see you in 3 months. A week later, I sent her a ticket. We've been together ever since 1979. That's my wife.
You just take her to all the best sets.
Well, that's right. I mean, but this is obviously before 1986. So that was the first one I took her to. And so we will always have Chicago as kind of a romantic, you know, this isn't necessarily what you wanted to know about.
I'm loving this.
This is awesome.
This is fantastic.
I will tell you one story from that, and that is there is a scene in Blues Brothers at the mall. You familiar with the scene in the mall?
I am familiar with Blues
Can you tell me
Brothers.
what the first interior shot is after the cars have been racing around?
Okay, all right. I guess I spoke too
They
soon.
crash through the wall
crash
going
through
into the mall,
yeah.
and they come into a toy store. And so we had a toy store set in the mall, and we put a fake wall there, and ran the car through, and it burst through and knocked over every shelf in the thing and knocked all the toys off the shelves. And, you know, when the dust cleared, everybody's okay. John Landis picked up a Kermit the Frog doll that had fallen over here and wired it to the front bumper of the Bluesmobile.
Okay.
And you can't see it. I've looked frame by frame. I've tried to see it in the thing. And then we shot for a week there. Complete mayhem. I don't think you could do that scene today. Certainly not the way we did it, because we were all working in this interior thing, cars with exhaust, actual glass, not breakaway glass. I mean, how hazardous, how dangerous by today's standards. Back then it was like, oh yeah, we'll take one for the team. We're going to, you know, it's going to be fine. And by the way, John Landis would later go on in 1982 to kill 3 people at Indian Dunes on Twilight Zone.
On Twilight Zone.
And I'd be happy to come back and talk about that all day long with you. But what I will say is that if David Sosna had been the first on Twilight Zone, it would not have happened. That he would have had the wherewithal to say, John, Let's stop the shot. Let's do this properly. We'll get the shot. It'll be where you want it to be, but we're not going to do it unsafely. So I just want to do that shot out. So anyway, at the end of the week of shooting, and the place was, trashed. Right. There was nothing there. I found the Kermit doll. And so I took that home, and that has become our icon for Debbie and me. Every location I've been on, Poland, Italy, everywhere, Kermit's come with us. The portrait of our children has them holding Kermit. And it's just that really became a kind of an icon for us, our first child.
So
That's
sweet.
Wonderful. I love that story so much. Oh my gosh.
My favorite thing about Blues Brothers is its sweetness. Like it's got a lot of heart for a movie that's about being
it's about
insane.
the music. It's about the music. And I tell you, Cab Calloway, I met him. I could not have been more knocked out.
That is fantastic.
More than Aretha Franklin, more than anything. Now, I only did the Chicago portion. They came back and did an awful lot of it here, which I was not on payroll for, unfortunately. But I had a great time. We had 3 months there. It was fantastic.
It has a lot of that recklessness, revolutionary, like rawness of the 70s movies and television. And yet it also is the beginning of, okay, really, let's just do a 25-minute car chase and crash things. Well,
I guess what they had in the 70s for a brief shining moment is when they were letting auteurs do studio movies.
Yes.
They were letting, is that the streams crossed, and you had the Chinatown, and you had the Godfather. You had, right? Yeah. And there, Harold and Maude, and, that kind of group of things. And then it just became clear that that's not the movie that that's not the business studios wanted to be in.
Well, and again, it was also Jaws and Star Wars that turned everything into a blockbuster, right? Like suddenly that's the business we want to be in.
Yeah.
And I love both those movies, but in some ways their success marked the beginning of a blockbuster era that has never, ever, ever left us.
I'm going to tell you my Jaws story, even though it's completely off the track.
Okay.
Yes, you've heard it, I think, but this is just...
But our viewers haven't. All those viewers out there.
Okay, let me paint you a picture. That in 1974, we'd all been... I was in the mailroom at Universal, and we were aware that there was this movie that they were shooting that was really in trouble, and it was Jaws. And there were a number of reasons that it was not shut down that are not particularly well known. One is that Marsh Green, who was the film executive, his brother Hilton Green was the TV executive. They had both grown up as part of the Universal family. Their dad Doug Green had been Mary Pickford's director, right? They came by it honestly. Yeah. So anyway, Marsh was out with a heart attack, and John Oster, who's the head of the budget department, was also out for health reasons for a particular amount of time. So they were not, my perspectives, they were not getting the information amalgamated correctly to shut down the movie. They would absolutely have shut down. So anyway, Jaws is going on. We're aware that there have been issues with it, but it's also, there's the big shark. At one point, we'd actually snuck out from the mailroom to see where the shark was being built, and we'd seen Bruce. And you know where he is now, right?
Mm-hmm. He's at Universal
on the tram tour. Isn't that him?
No, he is. Something, there might be more than one Bruce,
okay.
But I'm under the impression that the real Bruce, the shark, is hanging in the Academy Museum.
Oh,
really?
When you go up to the top floor, yeah. He is there in space there for it. So anyway, the movie is getting ready to open, and it's about a month before the movie opens. And I can't remember if they've had the Dallas screening where they got the idea, oh yes, this might be a successful movie. But there's going to be a screening this Wednesday coming up. And I go to my friend Stan Musgrove, because, I've been schmoozing him for a year in the mailroom. And I say, can I get into this screening? Can you help me get into the screening on Wednesday? He said, okay. I came back the next day. Okay, here's what you do. The screening's at 8 o'clock. At 7:45, you stand outside the main gate. A white limo will pull up. The back door will open. You get in, and you can go as Mae West's guest.
Hello. What? Hold on. We're sitting up. Go.
For your listeners, Mae West was the first Madonna. I don't know. Even Madonna is probably dated now. The Lady Gaga. Before there was Lady Gaga, there was Mae West.
And then before there was Madonna, there was Marilyn Monroe. And before Marilyn Monroe, there was Mae West.
Mae West was a creator. She was a playwright. She was much more than Marilyn Monroe. right? And she was arrested, and she had a play on Broadway called Sex. I mean, she was the real thing.
Okay.
In 1974, she's 83 years old. She is still making movies. She was in a movie called Sextet that very year. And I can't believe it. Yes, I will go. I'm absolutely going to do that. So there it is, 7:45. I'm there. The car pulls up, door opens, I get in, and there she is, right?
You are going to see Jaws.
Yes.
In a white limo.
Yes.
With Mae West.
The shortest ride in the world in a white limo. Because they've already arrived at the studio. Okay.
That's okay.
And there's 2 or 3 other guys in addition to the driver. It's not a one-on-one date. Nothing. I don't expect anything's going to happen.
But you're part of her entourage.
I am part of the entourage. Absolutely. I am probably the worst built guy there. Okay. And so we go into the Hitchcock Theater, bloop, right? Park, get out, walk in, and I'm sitting next to her. And we're a few minutes early, right? Waiting for the lights to go down. And she's starting to tell me some stories about the 1930s, how she discovered Cary Grant, how she had an all-white apartment, and she had a pet monkey, and he threw his feces all over the place, right? And I am in hog heaven. This is the greatest thing. I mean, I'm a big fan of the movies of the 20s and 30s, so I'm well aware of who she is, and I am having such a great time. Then the lights come down, and none of us has ever seen Jaws before, right? We don't know.
Right.
Everybody knows now that there's this poor stunt girl that goes out from the party and is going to get eaten immediately. Mae West has not finished. She is still telling me the story. Because once you start her at age 83, she finishes when she's ready to finish. And she has this arc. She has the whole thing down to a science. And no f***ing shark is going to stop her from telling a story. So it's like, Mae West, shut up. I'm trying to watch the movie. So that really, it just made my 21-year-old head explode. It was like one of the greatest nights of all time.
When you get into the limo, though, what does she say? Does she say anything to you, or does anybody?
It's hello, I'm Jerram. I don't even remember. That part is not known to us. Now,
that's one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. So
there's so many parts of that are amazing. That's the best part.
That's right. That's right. Shut up, Mae West.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so it's a little off topic.
It is, but it's a great off topic.
One thing about Blues Brothers I'm going to say is my assistant, whom we found in Chicago, I interviewed a few, was a gal named Ketterly Frauenfelder.
That's a name.
Who was brilliant. She was so smart, and she has been Tim Burton's assistant director and executive producer for about 25 years.
That is fantastic.
Wow.
I mean, her career is so much better than my career. But I was very lucky to have her on Blues Brothers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Your career has been pretty good.
Yeah, but it's not Ketterly's career. But I do have the Kerbit doll, and she does not. So
there you go.
So there.
All right. So Cagney and Lacey. We got to talk about Cagney and Lacey because this is 80s TV. Ladies, after all, let's bring it back into our sweet spot. And you worked on a couple episodes of Cagney and Lacey. Yeah. How was that? What was going on?
It was fun. It was great. I liked the ladies.
What season was it? Do you remember? Had they been around for a while? I mean,
I was one of their very last seasons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So obviously then it was Sharon Glass playing.
Yes.
Yeah, there were 3 Cagneys.
So,
right.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before. When we get to Cagney and Lacey, we will dive further into that whole 3 Cagneys, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, so what it also looks like, and again, we haven't examined it closely, but it definitely was a show that in the 80s felt like it was trying to be a feminist show. It was clearly like, here they're 2 ladies and they're cops,
right?
But they're
one's a single lady,
one's a single lady,
and the other's a nice married lady with a lovely husband.
And don't worry, she still likes to have sex with him,
right?
It's fine, but it's again. It more than the other shows we've yet really talked about or looked at closely. This was a show that had an agenda and was also an issue show. Like it was like, the Hill Street Blues, the hospital shows.
It was all Barney Rosenzweig. He was really the genius behind that. And for every episode, what we would do is we would come, the director and I and production designer would sit in Barney's office, in his small office, kind of crowded around, and he would take us through the script beat by beat and explain to us exactly what the intention was. That was always very useful.
And it was really the first show we're going to be talking about that is about the 2 female leads. It's their stories, and they're the ones that are driving story without having the counterpart who is a man. Obviously, there are men in the show, but the show is really about their relationship.
They are driving the story.
Yeah.
It is their journeys to their end, and that female work friendship so particularly unique. Even now, like there's not a lot that is focused on. These are two people who work together and they create a relationship that is a friendship, but also a working friendship.
And they didn't hang out together.
Yeah,
I mean, because Lacey went home.
Mm-hmm.
She went to her husband.
She and her kids and had stuff to do it. And Chris went out to wherever it was that she went to and lived her life as a single woman in New York, you know, so good for her. Yeah. Good for both of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I like about the premise in the show, that it does show that balance, that there isn't one way to be a feminist. It's a combination of things.
All right. But that was shot in LA.
Yeah.
It's set in New York, shot in LA.
They always said that was their biggest mistake.
Yeah.
It was not shooting it in New York, because we were like fighting it. I remember this is the first time I saw this particular gag. It was that our camera truck said New York Times on the front and New York Post on the back, so we could park it in the shot. But it was always guys rushing around putting license plates on to real cars, and you know, because you didn't have the CGI, you know, you couldn't just do that.
Oh my God! All right, that's fantastic.
I have one memory that has nothing to do with Cagney or Lacey, but it was just a funny thing that happened. We were shooting in the Alexandria Hotel
downtown.
At that point, it was one of its terrible periods. It's come back, it's gone away, it's come back, it's gone. I don't know where it is right now. So we were shooting a scene where Cagney and Lacey come out of the elevator and they run down the corridor for something. So the camera is set up in this little landing opposite the elevator, and we're ready to go. And the other elevator door opens. And, you know, we all look over, you know, we're controlling the elevators. I'm in charge of, you know, okay, it's on hold. But unexpectedly, the other elevator door opens, and this guy looks out and he sees the camera pointing essentially at him. And as the doors close, he goes, "Stella!" What was great about it, and of course the late episodes, was that we were filming at this lot on Lacey Street, as it happens. There's actually a lot there, right? And what was great, it was so close to downtown that it was very easy to make moves to and from the studio. We could go out, do running shots, and then come back in and have lunch and shoot the rest of the day. Okay. And also what was unusual in that is we shot, I believe, 7.5 days per episode. We did not crossboard, but we shot 7.5 days an episode. That meant that lunch on the 8th day, we changed directors.
Oh, okay. That's a little bit crazy.
Wow.
Well, you know, it was fine. But it was always funny to have like an extra director's chair saying director on it hanging around for the guys that we didn't always finish exactly at lunch.
Yeah, so there was a little crossover. How you doing? Oh, you're going to put the camera there.
It's rather more directors than we're used to seeing at the time.
All right. And so more recently, you've worked on Mercy Street and Astronaut Wives Club and, you know, some what I would call like a 2015 TV ladies shows.
Is Mercy Street something that you guys are familiar with?
I was familiar with it. It's a PBS show about Civil War nurses. Yeah. All right.
It was a great show. I thought that was a terrific, underrated show that never found its audience. And finally what happened after 2 seasons, the people would not work for PBS money anymore.
And so you work with the Film Commission. What are you doing now?
I'm helping with films that get tax credits, movies and TVs in California. And part of the process of getting tax credit is you have to submit your script, your budget, your schedule, a number of different things. And I'm tasked with going through, evaluating, correcting the budget. Certain things qualify, certain things don't qualify. And then we throw a bunch of mathematics at it and we figure out your show is going to provide more jobs in California than your shows. It's mathematical, whether it's accurate, who can say? But it started out as a lottery, and it's conceived that this is more fair than a lottery. Every show that receives a tax credit also needs to give back in the sense of hiring an intern, bringing a class of students onto the set to visit and neb around, doing a teacher externship, things like that. And I'm in charge of that. That's the career readiness requirement. And so I put shows together with schools, with whether it's the Fashion Institute, whether it's John Muir High School, whether it's Ghetto Film School, I get them together. And we've been doing a lot of panels lately where the director and the producer, we had people from Macbeth, the show Macbeth, do a very generous panel for, I forget who it was. And so we're eventually going to be linking to them on our website so other people can see those and enjoy them.
All right. So we have 3 questions that we ask all of our guests.
So, first question, what's the 80s ladies-driven TV show that's most resonated with you? Think back to the 80s and...
I wasn't watching TV in the 80s. I was shooting. I was, I had a time only for my career and for my family. Can you give me a hint? What shows were on?
You know what? Because you were working with people, I'm going to give you what 80s ladies actress was fun to work with.
Fair enough. On Cagney and Lacey, there was...
Tyne Daly, Sharon Glass.
Tyne was my favorite. I love Tyne.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And actually, I became friendly with Ellen Burstyn for a while. She wasn't really an 80s lady on TV, but I did a show with her in the, would have been late 70s. And she and I became Scrabble buddies, and we corresponded for a while. Oh, I really liked her. We were taking an airplane to Texas to do the show, and I was sitting next to her. And as we started our descent, she says, "Hang on, I have to help land the plane." And then we landed. She was okay.
All right, I
loved her.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, and what are your current television shows with ladies leading the pack? TV movies?
Well, there's some good ones on Game of Thrones. There's some ladies that I liked on Game of Thrones, which I recently caught up with. We also recently watched Treme.
Oh.
And do you know that one?
Mm-hmm. Haven't seen it, but yes.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. And there were a couple of wonderful ladies in that. There was a gal who ran a restaurant that her travails were terribly interesting. And I liked the ladies in that show a lot. Oh, and Hacks.
Oh, Hacks. Of course.
And that's wonderful. And I think both leads are good. Although I think the young writer's a bit of a jerk.
The young writer's a little hard. Yeah. Jean Smart's amazing.
Jean Smart's. I've done a number of shows with Jean Smart. She was in Samantha Who.
You did Samantha?
I did Samantha Who.
Okay.
And Melissa McCarthy was in that too.
Okay.
And she was fantastic. And I love Christina. And Christina Applegate is tops in my book. I love her. One weird thing, after I got an iPhone, and I kept trying to try automatic dial, for whatever reason, the cell phone decided it would always call Christina Applegate. Calling Christina Applegate. I have to hang up real quick. I mean, I don't know why. It just got it into its head.
They do have a mind of their own sometimes.
I loved her. She was just so much fun. I was a production manager on that. I wasn't on the set, so I wasn't really connected that closely to him. And we all thought Melissa McCarthy was fantastic.
It's fantastic. The great cast. Great cast on that show.
That was a show that really was, I think, overlooked, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, but it feels like it ran for a while.
I think only 2 seasons, maybe a little more.
I think 2 seasons, if that.
In my mind, it was like 3 seasons. That 3rd season was amazing.
Yeah, when we went to Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Going to Ireland is always the best. So 3rd question is, what's the most action hero / television moment you've experienced in real life?
Okay, so we were doing a movie called The 13th Year, a TV movie for Disney about a kid that turns into a mer person. It was kind of a metaphor for adolescence. Mm-hmm. And we were filming down in one of those Newport beaches or sort of places. And 2 things happened in quick succession. One was we were on some rocks or something overlooking the bay. And I walked out in front of the crew, and I was holding the board in front of me to explain something, and I suddenly realized I was doing Moses, right? With my tablets in front of everybody. And then just as that happened, the location manager played a prank on me, which took me so by surprise, it made me think I was crazy. And that was, there was a ferry going by, and this must have been 300 yards away, and everybody on the ferry suddenly went, "Hello, Jerram."
Oh my God.
And it's just like, I shit. So those two things happened at almost the same moment. And so that was kind of weird.
Oh, that's
okay. That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh my God. It has been such a pleasure to have you on the show and hear all these stories.
Thank you very much. I had a good time.
Thank you so much, Jerram.
Right, thank you.
Hey, Susan, what time is it?
It's audiography time, Sharon.
Woohoo! You can find out more about the Television Academy at emmys.com. That's EMMYS.com. They have really cool events, some of which are open to the public.
And Jerram mentioned the Directors Guild of America DGA training program. And you can find out about that program and other director development programs through the Directors Guild at dga.org. And there will be links on our website to those resources.
And if you want to watch Remington Steele on streaming, breaking news! All 5 seasons are currently available on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. We're not sure for how long all 5 seasons will be streaming, so go watch them while you can.
And Sharon, I'm not saying that the last 3 seasons are now available because of 80s TV ladies and our fans, but actually that is what I'm saying, because I'm telling you, when we started this podcast, only seasons 1 and 2 were legally available anywhere online.
And now we've got them all.
I think it's us and our fans. Thank you, 80s TV ladies fans. And a book I want to tell you about, Backwards and in Heels by film reporter and critic Alicia Malone. This book highlights stories of specific women in film, from Alice Guy Blaché to Ava DuVernay, while exploring the past, present, and future of women working in film. It's really quite good, even though it's not just about TV ladies.
Next time on 80s TV Ladies, the amazing, adorable, and ever-surprising 90s TV babies will be back.
Sarita, Megan, and Sergio were assigned 3 episodes of Remington Steele to watch, so we are looking forward to hearing the thoughts of the youths. If you're a Remington Steele fan, I'm curious what 3 episodes you would pick to represent the show to someone who has not watched it. Let us know at 80stvladies.com.
In the meantime, please follow, rate, and review on your favorite podcast player or on Apple Podcasts.
We love your suggestions and questions. Keep them coming. And as always, thanks for listening.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.